I found my husband's second wedding invitation in his jacket pocket. The card was cream. That was the first thing she noticed. Thick, heavy cream stock with gold embossed lettering, the kind of card that costs money to print, the kind that announces itself as serious before you have even read a single word. Chisom had found it in the inside breast pocket of Obiora's dinner jacket, the one she was preparing for dry cleaning, the one he had worn 3 Saturdays ago to what he described as a colleague's send-off at a hotel in Lekki. She did not scream. She did not drop the jacket. She stood in the middle of the bedroom, with the afternoon light coming through the curtains in long flat stripes across the floor, and she read the card twice, then a third time, her lips not moving, her breathing steady, in the way that breathing becomes steady only when the body has decided that the alternative is collapse. The names were printed in the center. Obiora Nnamdi Dike and Uchenna Blessing Okafo. Request the pleasure of your company at their wedding celebration. The date was the 14th of next month. The venue was Diamond Suites in Enugu, a hall Chisom knew because her cousin had held her 40th birthday there 3 years ago, and Chisom had helped decorate the tables with white lilies and gold ribbon. She knew the hall, she knew the date, she knew the groom's name because she had been married to him for 11 years. What stopped her breath was the bride's name, Uchenna Blessing Okafo. She knew that name. She had spoken that name out loud in this house. She had spoken it with warmth, without suspicion, without any of the alarm that the name should have triggered if she had known what it was carrying. Chisom put the card back in the pocket exactly as she had found it. She smoothed the jacket. She placed it with the dry cleaning pile. She went to the kitchen and finished the ogi she was cooking for their daughter's afternoon meal. She served dinner that evening at 7:15 the way she always did. She sat across from her husband at the table and she watched him eat, and she smiled when he made a comment about the pepper in the soup, and she refilled his water without being asked. She had 30 days. In those 30 days, she would have to decide who she was going to be. The wife who confronts, the wife who waits, the wife who leaves quietly, the wife who destroys everything. She did not know yet which one she was. She sat at that table and she studied the man across from her, as though seeing him for the first time, which in a sense she was, and she thought, I have been living in a house with a stranger for 11 years, and the stranger has very good table manners. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark and listened to Obiora breathe beside her, and she catalogued everything. Every late return, every business trip to Enugu that had been, she now understood, not entirely about business. Every weekend he drove north to see his mother, who was 73 and arthritic and lived in the old family compound in Auka, and who adored Chisom and called her Nne and pressed her hands with peppery warmth whenever they visited. Except the visits had been less frequent these past 2 years, and the phone calls to Auka that Chisom sometimes overheard in the corridor were shorter than they used to be. She lay in the dark and she thought about Uchenna Blessing Okafo. She first heard that name 14 months ago, introduced as the daughter of one of Obiora's colleagues, a girl who had just returned from studying abroad and needed guidance about setting up a small business. Obiora had asked Chisom if she would speak with her. Chisom ran a fabric importing business, small but established, as she had the kind of practical knowledge that takes years to build. They had met once for coffee at a place in Victoria Island. Uchenna was 28, clear-skinned, with the specific kind of composed ambition that comes from good education and attentive parents. She asked intelligent questions. She took notes. Chisom liked her, had told Obiora afterward that she was impressive, that he should tell her father she will go far. She thought about this now in the dark, and the memory cuddled. The coffee, the notes, the questions which Enna had asked about building something that lasts. How long by then had she been building something with Obiora?
How many of those questions were theater, performed for the wife who was being studied while believing she was helping? On day 3, Chisom called her sister, Ngozi. Ngozi was 2 years older, a secondary school vice principal in Abuja, a woman of organized opinions and surgical instincts who had never particularly liked Obiora for 11 years out of love for her sister. When Chisom told her what she had found, Ngozi went silent for exactly 4 seconds, and then she said, "Send me a photograph of the card." "I put it back." "You put it back." "I wasn't ready." Another silence. "Chisom, how are you functioning right now?" "I don't know. I'm functioning." "Who else knows?" "No one." "Good. Keep it that way. Do not tell anyone, not Mama, not your friends, no one, until we know the full shape of this. When a man is doing what he appears to be doing, there are always more layers. We need to find the layers before we move." This was good advice. Chisom held it. She held it while she went to market on day 4 and greeted the women at the fabric stores she had known for years. She attended a naming ceremony on day 6 with a smile that cost her more than anyone watching could calculate. She held it on day 8 when Obiora came home in the middle of the afternoon, which was unusual, and she heard him on a call in the bedroom and heard through the half-closed door a tone in his voice she recognized, the particular warmth that a man reserves for the person he is most trying to please. He said, "Yes, everything is arranged. Don't stress yourself." He said, "I'm handling it." He said, after the 14th, everything changes. After the 14th. The 14th was the wedding date. After the 14th, everything changes. Chisom stood in the corridor with her back to the wall and breathed through her nose and thought about what it meant that he had said everything changes. He was not planning to hide the second marriage. He was planning to tell her afterward. He was planning to come home on the 15th and say the words that men in certain situations say. The words about tradition, about family pressure, about needs that are not being met, wrapped in the language of inevitability, as though the second marriage were a weather event rather than a choice he had been making daily for however long this had been happening. She went back to the kitchen before he came out of the bedroom. She stirred a pot that did not need stirring. He came in and kissed her cheek and asked about their daughter, and she answered normally, and inside she was absolutely burning. On day 11, she drove to Enugu. She told Obiora she was visiting a fabric supplier. This was not a lie. She did have a supplier in Enugu, a man named Chukwemeka who stocked imported Ankara that she couldn't find in Lagos. She visited Chukwemeka. She placed a small order. Then she drove to Diamond Suites. She sat in the car park and looked at the building. It was large and well-maintained, the kind of venue that understood its own importance, with glass doors and a canopied entrance and potted palms on either side of the steps. A woman was inside the lobby, speaking with what appeared to be the event coordinator, gesturing at something on a tablet, animated and purposeful. Even at this distance, through the glass, Chisom recognized the posture. Uchenna. She was planning her wedding in a building that Chisom could see from her car. She was discussing flowers or table settings or the sequence of events on the day, and she was 30 days away from becoming the second wife of a man whose first wife was sitting in a car park 50 meters away, gripping a steering wheel with both hands. Chisom did not go inside. She did not know what she would do if she went inside, and not knowing is its own kind of warning. She drove back to Lagos. She stopped at a petrol station on the way and sat in the forecourt for 20 minutes, and the attendant knocked on her window twice before she noticed him. Now, if you are watching this and you think you know where this story is going, I want to ask you to stay with it, because this is the point where everything you have assumed begins to shift. This is the point where the story becomes something other than what it appeared to be. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so now, because what is underneath this story is worse and stranger and more painful than a man planning a second wedding. On day 13, Ngozi arrived in Lagos. She had taken leave from school and told Chisom she was coming before Chisom could say she didn't need her. This was the correct decision. Chisom needed her. She had been carrying this alone for nearly 2 weeks, and the weight of it was doing something to her posture, something her daughter had noticed. 8 years old and sharp-eyed, their daughter Adaora, who had asked twice why Mommy's eyes looked tired and had been told twice that Mommy had too much work. Ngozi arrived with a bag and a plan. "We need to know when this started," Ngozi said within an hour of arriving, seated at the kitchen table with her hands around a mug of tea. "Based on what?" Chisom said it was at least 2 years. Based on what? The change in how he was. He became less present. I thought it was work stress. I thought it was the contract he lost in 2022 that he took badly. I gave him space for it. I made room. Ngozi looked at her carefully. "Did you speak to Uchena's father?" "I don't even know him. Obiora told me he was a colleague. I don't know which company, which department, nothing." "What's the father's name?" Chisom tried to remember. Obiora had mentioned it in passing the day he asked her to meet Uchenna for coffee. A name. She pulled at the memory. "Okafor," she said. "He said Dr. Okafor." Ngozi opened her laptop. It took her 40 minutes to find him. Dr. Emmanuel Okafor, a retired engineer who worked with a federal infrastructure agency before retirement. His social media was semi-public and thorough in the way that the social media of men in their 60s often is. Grandchildren, church events, civic gatherings, pride in children's achievements. There was a photograph of a wedding introduction ceremony posted 3 months ago. Uchenna was in it, kneeling with the traditional items before a man seated across from her. Chisom leaned towards the screen. The man seated across from Uchenna in the photograph was not Obiora. Ngozi saw it at the same moment. They looked at each other. "That is not her husband-to-be," Chisom said slowly. "Or it is, and Obiora is something else," Ngozi said. They read the caption. The caption said, "Our daughter and her intended, may God guide them." The man in the photograph was in his early 30s, not Obiora, who was 44, not Obiora at all, a younger man with the careful suit of someone attending an important occasion. "She is engaged to someone else," Chisom said slowly. "And also planning a wedding with your husband," Ngozi said. The room was quiet for a moment. "What kind of wedding is this?" Chisom said, not rhetorically, with genuine confusion. What ceremony is being planned that has a printed cream invitation with gold embossing, a booked venue, and a bride who is simultaneously engaged to another man in her family's official introduction photograph? "Traditional wedding," Ngozi said quietly. "Not a church wedding, not a registry, a traditional rite." Chisom sat back. A traditional wedding conducted properly can have real legal and social weight, depending on how it is structured and who witnesses it. But it is also, in the architecture of a man who is managing multiple situations, the kind of wedding that can be explained later, rationalized, placed in the language of culture and family expectation, and the needs of a woman's people who require a proper ceremony before the other arrangements can be formalized. It is the kind of wedding that can be presented to one woman as the official union and to another as a separate matter entirely. Obiora was planning to stand in Diamond Suites in Enugu on the 14th and perform a ceremony that meant everything to Uchenna and her family and could be described to Chisom as something more ambiguous. He was not planning to have 2 wives in the way Chisom had first understood it. He was planning to have 2 women, each believing she occupied a different part of his life, each provided with just enough truth to prevent her from looking further. This realization changed the texture of Chisom's anger. It had been hot before, the clean, burning anger of a betrayed wife. Now, it became something colder and more structural, because if this was the design, then Uchenna was also being managed. Uchenna, who did not know about Chisom, or did she? Had their coffee meeting been reconnaissance? Had those intelligent questions been about more than setting up a business? I need to speak to her, Chisom said. No, Ngozi said immediately. Not yet. She may not know he is married. Or she may know and be complicit. Or she may be as deceived as I am. They looked at the photograph on the screen. The young man beside Uchenna at the introduction. He looked smiling with the uncomplicated happiness of someone who believes he is beginning something. He did not look like a man who knew that his fiancée was also 3 weeks away from a traditional wedding ceremony with a married man in Lagos. Who is he? Chisom said, meaning the young man in the photograph. Ngozi read the comments under the post, found a tag, followed it. Ngozi said, his name is Kelechi Eze. He works in banking. He lives in Abuja. Chisom stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she said something she had not said in 2 weeks. What is happening? This was the right question, because the situation had moved beyond a man planning a second marriage. There was a woman in this who was also apparently running a parallel arrangement. Uchenna Blessing Okafor was engaged to a banker in Abuja. She was also a bride-to-be in Enugu for a man in Lagos who was already married. What did Uchenna want that required both of these arrangements? What was she building? On day 17, Chisom made a decision that Ngozi had not sanctioned. She called Uchenna, not to confront. She was careful about this. She called with the cover story of a follow-up, the natural excuse of a businesswoman checking in on someone she had informally mentored. Her voice was warm and unhurried. Uchenna picked up on the third ring and sounded genuinely pleased to hear from her. They spoke for 12 minutes about the fabric business, about a challenge Uchenna was having with a supplier, about import documentation. Chisom gave real advice because fake advice would have required more performance than she had available. And then, near the end, she said, almost as an afterthought, I think I saw your father on social media. Congratulations are in order, yes? He posted about an introduction ceremony. A pause. Not long. A single breath. Yes, Uchenna said. Thank you. Your intended looked very happy. He is, Uchenna said. When is the wedding? We are still planning, Uchenna said. Her voice had taken on a slight quality of management, the tone of someone answering a question while simultaneously deciding how much of the answer to give. Chisom let it go. She ended the call warmly, the way you end calls with people you like, and she sat with the phone in her hand, and she thought about that pause, that one breath. A woman who had nothing to hide would have answered the question about the wedding with a date, or at least a season. The pause said, I am calculating what you know, which meant Uchenna knew something about the relationship between Chisom and Obiora. The question was how much. Ngozi, when told about the call, was frustrated, but also, Chisom could see, quietly impressed. What did the pause tell you? Chisom said that she is not innocent, but also, Chisom stopped. Also? I think she knows about me, but doesn't know how much I know. Yes, I think she knows she's marrying a married man. I don't think she knows I found the invitation. I don't think she knows I'm counting days. What does she want from this? From him? That, Chisom said, is the question I have not answered yet. The answer came on day 22 from a source neither of them had considered. Obiora's younger brother, Chidi, called the house on a weeknight. Chidi was 38, unmarried, perpetually underemployed, the kind of man who floated through his family's life, attached to his more successful brother's gravity. He called to speak to Obiora, and Obiora was not home, and Chidi, who had never been good at managing what he said and to whom he said it, said, tell him I heard from Uncle Cyprian about the transfer. He should call Uncle Cyprian before the 14th. The transfer. Uncle Cyprian. Chisom said, "I'll tell him," and wrote down every word and called Ngozi within 10 minutes of hanging up. Ngozi found Uncle Cyprian inside 3 hours. He was Obiora's father's elder brother, a man in his late 70s who had spent his working life in land administration in Enugu State, and who was, as far as anyone could tell from public records, still connected to the management of several large parcels of land in the Enugu region. Land in the Enugu region, a traditional wedding in Enugu, a bride whose family was from Enugu. Chisom sat very still. "He is not marrying her because he loves her," she said. "He is marrying her because of land." Ngozi looked at her. "Say it plainly." Uchenna's family has something: land, access, a connection to someone who controls something in Enugu. Obiora is marrying into it. The traditional wedding gives him the family tie. The family tie gives him access to something Uncle Cyprian is facilitating. She paused. "And Uchenna?" "Uchenna knows this is a transactional arrangement," Ngozi finished. "The banker in Abuja is her real future. Obiora is the bridge her family is gilding to something they want." "Her father," Chisom said, "Dr. Okafor, infrastructure. He retired from a federal infrastructure agency. There is land somewhere, a land allocation, a parcel that requires the right connection to transfer properly." They looked at each other across the table. This was not a love story. It had never been a love story on Uchenna's side, and perhaps it had stopped being one on Obiora's side some time ago. And what Chisom had been living inside without knowing was not a marriage troubled by a rival for her husband's heart. She had been living inside a business arrangement that was dressed in the clothes of betrayal to hide the fact that it was actually something more calculated. This made it worse, not better. The thought that her husband was not destroyed by love for another woman, but was instead using a woman, using a ceremony, using their own family name on a cream invitation with gold lettering to secure a land transfer, this sat in her chest with a different weight than heartbreak. This was a weight that had no name in the vocabulary of normal marital grief. She was now sure of 2 things. First, that she needed to be at Diamond Suite on the 14th, and second, that she was the only one who knew the full shape of this, and that the shape was uglier than anyone attending that wedding would understand. She spent the next 5 days preparing. She gathered what she could. The bank statement she had access to through their joint account, which showed a pattern of transfers to a company name she now looked up and found registered in Enugu. A logistics company that did not appear to do any logistics, that had Obiora's name as a director, that had been incorporated 18 months ago. She photographed the wedding invitation, which she retrieved one more time from the jacket pocket. It was still there. He had not moved it. She made copies of their own marriage certificate. She wrote down everything she had observed and the dates attached to each observation. She considered going to a lawyer. She decided against it for now. A lawyer required a strategy, and she did not yet have a strategy. She had information, and she had 30 days, and she was now 8 days left, and she was not sure what she was going to do with them, except that she was going to do something on the 14th. She told Obiora on day 28 that she needed to go to Enugu. Her supplier, she said, a large order. She would be there for the weekend. He looked at her when she said this. Not with suspicion exactly, but with a kind of heightened attention she had not seen in him before. A man who is managing a situation watches for signs of disruption. She met his look with her most ordinary expression and said, "I'll take Adaora to Mama before I go." He relaxed. "That's fine," he said. "I'll probably go to Akwa for the weekend myself. Mama has been asking." He would not go to Akwa. They both knew this now, though only one of them knew the other knew. The 14th came. Chisom arrived at Diamond Suites at noon, 2 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. She was not dressed for a wedding. She was wearing a plain dark dress, the kind that does not draw attention, and she sat in her car across the road from the venue and watched guests arrive. She watched the caterers move back and forth. She watched Uchena's family enter in a coordinated group, the women in matching Ankara, the men in Agbada, the celebration assembled from the outside like a perfectly constructed thing. She watched Obiора's car pull in at 12:40. He was not alone. Chidi was with him, and Uncle Cyprian, who was shorter than she had imagined from looking him up, with white hair and the careful walk of a man who knows he is important in whatever room he enters. She did not go inside immediately. She sat and she breathed. This was, she had come to understand over 30 days of carrying this alone, the choice point. Every decision she had been making for a month had been leading here, and now here was present, and she still did not know fully what version of herself she was going to be when she walked through those glass doors. What she had not counted on was Kelechi. He was standing near the entrance alone, with the look of a man who has arrived somewhere he did not expect to arrive and is now recalculating. He was in a suit, not in traditional dress. His hands were loose at his sides. He was looking at the guests entering the hall with an expression that Chisom recognized because she had been wearing a version of it for 30 days. He had found out.
She did not know how. She did not know whether someone had told him or whether he had found something the way she had found the card in the jacket pocket. The discovery that arrives not as a warning but as a fact, fully formed, demanding to be absorbed. But he was here, and he was not a guest, and he was looking at the hall the way you look at something that has replaced a thing you believed. She got out of the car. She walked toward him, and he looked at her with the wariness of a man who is already at maximum capacity for surprise. She said, "You are Kelechi?" He looked at her for a moment. "Yes, I am Chisom Dike, Obiora Dike's wife." The breath went out of him slowly, the way air leaves a room when a window closes. They stood outside Diamond Suites in the noise of arriving guests and the movement of caterers and the general organized celebration of a wedding ceremony happening inside. And they looked at each other, and neither of them had the language yet for what they were standing in. "You found out today?" she asked. "This morning, a friend, he saw the invitation. I found out 30 days ago." He looked at her differently now. "You've known for 30 days?" "Yes." "And you came here?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What are we supposed to do?" "I don't know," she said. And this was the truest thing she had said to anyone in 30 days. She had come here with information and without a plan, and now she was standing in front of a man who was equally ruined by the situation, and she realized that she had been hoping, without knowing she was hoping, that arriving would make the next step obvious. It did not. Inside the hall, the ceremony was beginning. She could hear the sound of it, the murmur of gathering, the particular stillness that falls over a crowd when something is about to be formalized. She thought about Adaura, 8 years old, at Chisom's mother's house, waiting for her mother to come back from a fabric trip. She thought about 11 years of a life that was real, even if the man at the center of it was not who she had believed him to be. She thought about the cream card with the gold letters, the weight of it in her hand, and how she had put it back and smoothened the jacket and gone to finish the laundry. She had spent 30 days being controlled, performing normality. She had become, over those 30 days, something tight and compressed, and she understood now, standing outside this hall, that the compression had been storing something she had not let herself feel, and that it was going to come out now whether she managed it or not. She walked inside. Kelechi followed her. The ceremony was in its opening stages. The families were arranged on their respective sides, the traditional items laid out, the elder who was to officiate standing at the center of the room with the composed authority of a man who has done this many times. Obiora was seated with Uncle Cyprian to his right and Chidi to his left, and he was wearing an agbada in deep burgundy, and he looked from a distance like a man who has organized a thing well and now is watching it complete itself. He saw her when she was halfway across the room.
The expression on his face was not guilt, not immediately. It was the expression of a man whose calculation has encountered something it did not include, a sudden and absolute blankness, the look of a structure meeting a load it was not built for. The room had noticed the disruption. The murmur of a gathering interrupted, head turning, the specific electricity of a celebration that has been entered by something that does not belong to it. She walked inside. Kelechi followed her. The ceremony was in its opening stages. The families were arranged on their respective sides, the traditional items laid out, the elder who was to officiate standing at the center of the room with the composed authority of a man who has done this many times. Obiora was seated with Uncle Cyprian to his right and Chidi to his left, and he was wearing an agbada in deep burgundy, and he looked from a distance like a man who has organized a thing well and now is watching it complete itself. He saw her when she was halfway across the room. The expression on his face was not guilt, not immediately. It was the expression of a man whose calculation has encountered something it did not include, a sudden and absolute blankness, the look of a structure meeting a load it was not built for.
He said her name. Just her name. Chisom. She had nothing left to say to him in this room. She looked at Kelechi, who was standing at the back of the room where he had stopped, and whose face held something she recognized as the beginning of a grief that would take a long time to work through. She turned and she walked back out. She did not hear what happened next inside the hall. She got into her car and she drove, and she was on the expressway before she pulled over at a petrol station and put her head on the steering wheel and stayed there finally for a very long time. Ngozi called. She did not answer. Her mother called. She did not answer. Adaora called from her grandmother's phone, and she answered that one because Adaora was 8 years old and had done nothing and was waiting. "Mommy, when are you coming?" "Soon," Chisom said. "I'm coming soon, my love." She drove to her mother's house. She arrived in the evening and Adaora ran to her at the gate with the uncomplicated joy of a child who does not yet know that the world has been rearranged. And Chisom held her daughter in the orange evening light and breathed into her hair and let the fullness of what she was holding finally, quietly, break her open. She did not know yet what the land deal would mean, what the lawyers would find, what the investigation that Ngozi had already quietly initiated through a contact at the Corporate Affairs Commission would uncover about the Enugu Logistics Company and Uncle Cyprian's land transfer and the money that had been moving through a marriage ceremony dressed as a family occasion. She did not know what would happen to Uchenna or to Kelechi, who had driven up from Lagos to stand outside a hall and had his own version of this to absorb. She did not know yet the full extent of what Obiora had built and what it would cost to dismantle. What she knew was her daughter's weight in her arms and the smell of her hair and the sound of her grandmother's generator running in the background and the specific quality of an evening in which something large has ended and the thing that comes next has not yet announced itself. There is a kind of destruction that happens so completely that it cannot pretend to be anything else. The hall in Enugu was what it was. The card in the jacket pocket was what it was. 11 years were 11 years, and the man who had lived them with her was both real and not real, both husband and stranger. And she was left with holding the residue of a life that had been built on something she could not now identify. And the residue was her daughter. And her daughter was enough, and was also not enough, and would have to be, for now, what she held on to. The 14th ended. The hall went back to being a hall for hire. The cream invitation with the gold letters became an exhibit, then a memory, then something she kept in an envelope in a drawer she did not often open. Uncle Cyprian's land transfer was investigated. It took 14 months. The company was dissolved. Obiora paid a price that was partly financial and partly the slower, less quantifiable price of becoming a man his daughter would need to be old enough to understand.
Kelechi married someone else 2 years later. We know this from a photograph someone shared on social media. A man at a wedding with the smile of someone who has decided, finally, to move forward. Uchenna returned to the banker from Abuja. Whether she had always intended to, whether the whole arrangement was her family's design or not hers, whether she had been a participant or a tool in her own father's scheme, these questions were argued in the months that followed among people who were at the hall that day, and no answer was sufficient, because people are never only one thing, and that includes the people who hurt us. Chisom stood in a courtroom 18 months later and stated her name and her years of marriage and answered the questions put to her with the same levelness she had used when she first answered the phone, then finished the laundry, then sat across the table and refilled her husband's water. She had 30 days once. Now she had the rest of whatever came after. It was not a good ending. It was the only one available.